Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's video. Following up on the videos earlier this week, we're going to talk more about parenting, whether your parent was a jerk or whether they were a narcissist or whether they were probably just parenting you like they should. Because I think it can be kind of confusing, because I think we all go through phases where we think our parents are just jerks, but maybe they were actually doing a good job. But maybe they weren't. What do you think?
Yeah, right.
I feel like and I don't always love to jump into this because sometimes people come into therapy and they're like, oh, you're just going to tell me that my parents messed me up or something, right? And I don't like therapy to get that kind of a rap, because I don't really see things as being totally like parents' fault, right? You're in
Sure.
therapy now because your parent was terrible, something like that. Instead, I just think that everybody was raised in a very specific environment, and that environment affects you for better and for worse.
Yeah.
And your parents did the best job that they could, but that doesn't always mean that you got everything that you needed, right?
Yeah. I think it's easy to go into therapy with that idea, and you will talk about your parents, but it's not everything. But you can't ignore the fact that you spent very formative years of your life with them, and you're going to take something away from that, good and bad, and you're going to have to dig through some of that for sure.
Right, and use the things that are now strengths for you that were developed during that time, and then other things that are maybe problematic for you, maybe things that you have to work through and overcome. And sometimes the only way to do that is by exploring some of the past and where some of this stuff has come from.
Yeah.
So how do you know?
How do you know if your parent's a jerk, or if your parent's a narcissist, or if your parent was just a parent?
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of times in therapy when I work with definitely teenagers, and maybe even sometimes to a young adult who's still living in the parent's home, I feel like I've seen a shift over the last several years of therapy where a lot of these young folks use words that are very clinical, right? My parents don't validate me. I can count on one hand the number of times that I said that when I was 17. Zero. I didn't even know what the word
You
validate
can count that on
meant.
no hands.
I can count on no hands, yeah. Good point. But now, like, I feel like teenagers say it all the time. And the question that comes into my mind is, if you are a teenager and you feel like your parents don't hear you or they don't understand you, say, I want to stay out late on a Friday night. My parents are like, no, your curfew's midnight. Well, all my friends are staying out till 1 or 2 in the morning. Why can't I do that? And parents say, no, curfew's midnight. Well, you just don't understand. You don't listen. You don't validate. You don't anything. And the thought that comes to my mind is there a space to be validating as a parent and to hear? And the answer is still no. And when I ask this question to teenagers, they're like, well, yeah, of course there is. But then they have a hard time giving me a scenario that's not them getting what they want and being validated. So my question is, how do you know if they're narcissistic or if they're doing good parenting or they're whatever?
Right. Well, maybe give us like a short recap, right? Like, what is narcissism? Because I feel like this is one of those terms that, like, it's a buzzword. It just gets thrown out there all the time. And I know our previous videos were about this, but just give us a real short recap, right? What is narcissism?
Gosh, that's a loaded question. I guess the idea behind narcissism, the main points that stand out to me are they sometimes have an inability to experience empathy, right? So they don't recognize that. They can't without a lot of training or coaching. There's a need for praise or admiration, and if they don't get it, then those individuals become critical of you, which you can kind of see in a parent-child relationship. Perhaps being a center focus. There's one other big one that I'm not remembering.
I appreciate you looking at me, but I'm not going to remember it either.
No?
I
Okay.
think these are the main things, right? This is a good recap, and if people want a little bit more in-depth discussion about this, they can check out your last video
The
where you
last
talk
one.
about this
Yeah.
some more. But you know, so these are the things that we're saying are narcissistic qualities that parents may have. And as a child, if you have a parent who's a narcissist, like, think about what that would look like. If you have a parent who, not just that they're not validating or that they set rules for you, but they literally are incapable of experiencing empathy for you in your situation, right? And I would say along those same lines, because they don't have that ability to have empathy, they can't understand or allow you to have a lot of your own thoughts or opinions. Those things are unacceptable to them because it's contrary to the way they see themselves, right? Especially if your thoughts or opinions go against something they believe in anyway. So as a child of a narcissist, you probably had a narcissistic parent if they couldn't allow you to ever have your own, or ever is probably not fair, but for the most part, right? You were not allowed to have your own thoughts and feelings. You weren't allowed to express them. And your parent was unable to empathize with you.
Okay. So providing maybe some emotional comfort. So if I tell you, no, you're still coming home at midnight, which may in fact be a good rule, and you're having a really intense emotional response, and my response is, if I'm narcissistic, it might be like, and I turn around and walk away.
Yeah, maybe like there's
Right?
some like stonewalling, some punishment for having your own opinion, right? Maybe some
Okay.
of that. I would also say that often a narcissist in a situation like that would try to turn it a bit and make you see that your wanting to stay out late is the problem. Your opinion and your needs are the problem, right? When you have a narcissistic parent, that's what happens. It's not just that there's a rule that you don't like. Instead, it's that if you have any need that's outside the realm of what they think you should have, then there's something wrong with you. And that's the message that you get over and over again, whether that's overtly or covertly, right? Maybe that's really something they express really well, and maybe it's not.
So that could be that critical part, right? If they think you should come home at midnight and you think it should be fair, you're being responsible, letting them know ahead of time, hey, we have a plan, this is who I'm going to be with, this is what we're going to do. Doesn't involve criminal activity, right? I should be able to stay out till 1 a.m. And then they make that you not listening is the problem, or you choosing to stay out, or you never pay attention to what I'm telling you. So if they spin it, that's more narcissism.
Yeah, I always think of it kind of like, it's if I'm the parent and you're the kid, right? If you would just actually listen and understand me, you would totally agree, right? The problem is that you won't. You're just not listening and you don't get what I'm saying, or you would definitely agree because I'm definitely right. Versus maybe the more appropriate parenting would be like, yeah, that sucks. I'm sorry you can't go out with your friends like till 1 a.m. because they get to, but this is the rule. Like, it sucks, but it is what it is. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I actually really like the Disney movie Tangled. Have you guys seen that?
It has been
A long
minute.
time ago. Yeah.
Mother Gothel is actually like perfect example of a narcissist. If you don't know what a narcissistic parent looks like, go back and
Watch
just
Tangled.
and even just like listen to the song where she talks about how like mother knows best, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because she'll say things to Rapunzel that like it starts to sound a little nice and then it totally turns and is like backhanded, right? Like, oh, you could never survive without me, so you have to stay here, right? Some of those things that when you really dive into like that, that's messed up, right? Like, you're so ridiculous, you could never survive on your own, like the only way you could survive is because of me. Those are the kinds of messages that we get from narcissists. And so I think that like watching that video can actually give you a little bit of insight to what it is that this looks like.
That totally just reminded me of the fourth thing. Like this
What's that?
grandiose self-importance.
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right.
Things won't be okay without me.
Right.
Anyway, side note.
Right. But I think that that's a good video to watch if you're wanting a little bit more insight about what this looks like. Right. When you've had a narcissistic parent, what do you think are some of the symptoms that we see our clients come in with?
Well, that's a good question. I think it can give you like a learned sense of, like if we think of like attachment theory, right? It probably creates a somewhat anxious attachment, or like even to the level of codependency probably.
Yeah, I was going to say probably a lot of self-doubt, self-confidence issues, and probably even self-esteem things. Because if every decision, again, every, right? Probably not everyone, but if the majority of the decisions that you made in life that you thought were good decisions and then were told,
That's stupid.
you're definitely going to start questioning your own ability to make decisions, which also means decision-making is probably something you're going to have a hard time doing.
Right. I would say having your own sense of self is going to be something that's really, really difficult Because if you were constantly told that the way you are, the things you think, what you feel is wrong, then how are you ever supposed to develop a real understanding of who you are as a person? You might even feel like who you are as a person is just inherently bad if you've had a narcissistic parent.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Because that's a hard thing to discover anyways, which leads me to believe probably people pleasing would be another
Lots of
thing that
people
you might
pleasing.
see, right? Because what decisions I make or things I do probably needs to be approved of by somebody else.
Yeah.
Because that's how it was with parents.
Right, that self-doubt that nothing you do is right, but if someone else tells you it is, that's how you're going to know, because you just couldn't know yourself. You never learned.
Right. You know, there are some things that we talk about that I think are real great, like self-help kind of topics, right? Things that you can do on your own that can be really useful. But to diagnose your own parent as narcissistic is not a good self-help strategy, right? Like, I don't think anybody should listen to these videos and be like, oh, hey, this means that my parent was a narcissist.
Yeah.
Because I think that this is pretty complicated. But I do think this can at least be like a starting point for people to start considering some of maybe how they were raised and maybe some of the things that their parents did well and maybe some of their parents' own shortcomings, right? Just because your parent had moments where they maybe acted like a jerk doesn't mean they're a narcissist. Just because your parent struggled to allow you to have some of your own opinions doesn't necessarily mean they're a narcissist.
Oh, thank heavens. Jack, you can't play in the dirt.
Right. I mean, those things don't necessarily mean your parent was a narcissist.
Sure.
But I think that, when I'm helping somebody kind of explore this topic and decide, like, was your parent a jerk? Was your parent a narcissist? Or was your parent just a parent who sometimes had some struggles in parenting like all of us parents do? When I'm helping somebody explore that, there's so many different things to look at, and it's kind of this whole picture that you put together. There's not just this one symptom or these two symptoms, and then you can say, oh, that's it, right? That's what's going on. Instead, I think it's really important, if this is something that somebody's listening to and they think maybe my parent was a narcissist, don't diagnose them yourself. Instead, maybe explore this a little bit with a therapist, because even somebody who is a narcissist may have different traits from another narcissist, right? The difference between a male narcissist and a female narcissist can look really, really different. And that's just like one example of a variation, right?
Yeah, I think it definitely exists on a spectrum of severity and symptoms, and I think a lot that plays into like what Josh was saying, where a lot of kids know these words now, and they have access to know just enough information to be dangerous, essentially, right? And start diagnosing the people around them and being like, oh, my parent did do that. He must be a narcissist. Where that's not really helpful. It might make you feel good, like, oh, yeah, the problem is definitely them and not me. But it always comes back to that idea, like, regardless of what tendencies your parents had, what they were good at, what they were bad at, like, the only way to alleviate these things is to do what's under our control, right? We can't change our parents and how they parented us, but we can change how we cope and how we manage things and the way we frame things in our brain.
Right. Well, and maybe if I could just like even put in a plug for therapy, right?
Yeah.
What can therapy do to help you if you've had a parent that was a narcissist? Well, therapy can help you work through some of those self-worth issues, right? That underlying feeling of like, I'm just inherently bad. We work through that in therapy. Problems with boundaries, like not knowing how do I set a boundary with a parent or with somebody else in my life. And by boundaries, I mean like the certain things that make you feel safe, Those are things that you can work on in therapy. I also think that it can be really helpful in therapy to discover your own sense of self so that you know who you are, what your opinions are, and you feel like you can know those things about you, but then also express them in appropriate ways and at appropriate times. These are all ways that therapy can help you as you recover from some of this.
I probably said this before, I had a boss when I worked at the school district, and I worked on this behavior team working with kids with behavior problems, and she would always talk about, like, we teach reading and we teach math and we teach these things in school, but no one ever taught these kids we work with how to behave. And it's very similar to what you're saying, like, you can't implement what you don't know, right? You can't implement what someone never taught you. And so sometimes I think a big benefit of going to therapy is, hey, come learn how to have good self-esteem. Come learn the ways to think. Come learn how to self-regulate and these stuff that nothing's wrong with you, just no one ever taught you. And so maybe you just need to learn at this point in your life instead because you didn't learn it as a kid.
Right. And so whether your parent was a narcissist or not, therapy can help a lot to fill in some of those gaps of things maybe you feel like you might have missed out on.
Thanks for the thoughts. It kind of helps me round out my question of your parents aren't always being narcissistic, but there is room that there are times some of them are. Mm-hmm. And that's important to remember too.
Right. Well, and I would say all of us are narcissistic at times, right?
Sure.
And
we have those tendencies.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there are times where I can be self-centered and that I can struggle with empathy, like all of these things. But the difference between having an experience where somebody is acting this way versus I had a parent with a narcissistic personality disorder and this was the majority of my experience is very different, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of the severity of our clients' symptoms depend on just how severely and pervasively mentally ill their parents were.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I have lots. I've got to organize them.
Well, maybe we'll come back. Thanks everyone for joining us for this video. We're glad to have Shara back since she knows so much more than us put together. But stay tuned, keep joining us, and we appreciate you guys watching and following. And we'll see you on the next video.
Thanks.
See you next time.